Good morning, Minard here. We're doing our book club, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Today is February 28th, 2023. Today we have a couple guests here. Not guests, but you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's Tristan again. I'm always here for every single one.
He's my co-partner in this.
Yep.
This is Justin. First time attending.
Yeah. So as we're getting into this, it was pretty short little read, but there's some depth to it. But I wanted to open it up with kind of some questions, I guess, unless you have other suggestions. But my thought was, like, what are some examples of how you have been domesticated in childhood? Because that first chapter was about domestication.
Yeah.
And as a parent, I have some thoughts on that too, because this kind of brought up some ideas for me as far as domesticating our kids.
Yeah, so I feel like he talks about agreements that you like don't really agree with, but like are made to agree with when you're a child. You know, I feel like that's like the most influenceable time period in your life, and so anything that anyone tells you, you're just gonna immediately believe it. So I've got some positive and negative things. Negative one would be my sister growing up. She had that middle child syndrome, so she would just always take it out on me because I was the youngest one, and she just would say mean things to me that I ended up like really believing I've realized that as I've grown up, and I'm trying to not agree with those things anymore. But it's hard to have things that you agree with in your childhood that like you have to change as an adult because you believed them for so long, you know. But like positive things, I feel like my parents definitely made me believe that anything was possible and that I'm a special snowflake, and in a regard that makes it like a positive experience, not like a negative one. So yeah, those are the kind of the things that I found. But it's really hard to like find your own agreements as an adult. I feel like because you've agreed with these things so much throughout your whole life, you don't really know what's your own word and what's other people's word at that point. And as a dad, I'm sure you have plenty of insights on that too. So
yeah, I mean, as a parent, it's interesting because we have societal norms of how kids are supposed to act in public and how they're supposed to be acting at school and at the home, and then little humans have emotions, and they're learning how to deal with those emotions. For example, this morning, I do my daily journal, and I record it and stuff, and it was all about, like, feeling paradoxically perfectly as I am right now, but also always growing and learning.
Yep.
So holding those two values. And as a parent, I always, like, strive for perfection, but I also recognize that, like, I'm always doing my best at any given moment. And right after that video, my daughter like broke her little like toy that my wife's been out of town and gave her this like nice little toy, and she broke it during play time, and it's like ready to go to school time, and like she just has a full on meltdown. And I'm like right in the middle of this like sense of like, oh man, like we can't let this happen. Like the wheels can't fall off. We still got to go to school. But like, because that's like this programming we have, like the domestication, like we got to like follow rules. We got to keep order. And like she really just like needed to like feel those feelings because she like really was upset with herself for breaking the toy. And so giving her some space, and like I kind of snapped a little bit. I'm like yelled for a second. And I'm like not feeling great about that. Like I just had this like recording of how I was like, showing up how I want to show up, and then triggered. And she's really good at finding those little buttons, right? And that's life. Like we got to recognize that life happens, and like how do you adapt and overcome? And then I apologized shortly after I regained my calm and let her kind of feel the emotions. She cried a little bit. She's only 7, but eventually she worked through it and got to school on time.
That's good.
Yeah, I can think about just even little silly beliefs. I don't have a perfect example right now, but everybody can probably connect with some sort of even small belief, like a snippet of information you got when you were a kid pertaining to just about anything, and you just carry it with you, and you just assume that it's right. And you tell people it as if it's like absolute fact, but then you realize later on in life, you're like, oh man, that was false information I've been carrying around.
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of like fake facts that I have in my head that
Precisely.
And I'll tell my girlfriend one of them, and she's like, that's just not true. And I'm like, are you sure it's not true? Because I've thought that my entire life, And I have like so many like made up truths in my head that I don't really realize are made up until like someone makes them apparent,
Well, like for example, the emotions, right? Men aren't supposed to show other emotions other than anger, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's like a very common, like acceptable societal like emotion versus like feeling fear or feeling shame or feeling anxiety and like but I think we're shifting that. I mean, people are more and more talking about mental health and recognizing that there's a wide array of feelings. But like, we believe that as society, like little boys shouldn't cry,
Yep.
you know, and like, that's full on taught. That has nothing to do with like real human experience.
A lot of people teaching it don't even realize they're teaching something that could be negative in the future. You know, like I've caught myself, like, if a student's crying, I've definitely changed the wording on it now. But like telling like a kid, like, hey, man up, like, let's not cry right now. But instead of like, I don't mean it as in a sense like, hey, you're not supposed to cry right now. It's like, hey, let's get over this and let's keep moving forward. But it's, as they get older, they can be like, oh, men don't cry.
Yeah.
You know, so now I just say, you're a soldier, like, we can keep going through this, you know, and like help them through that emotion versus like trying to stifle it. You know?
And that's there's some balance to that too, like the stoicism we've been doing, right? Like recognizing as you're going through those that like, how long do I want to sit in it? But not like just shoving it down and never dealing with it. That's when, you know, shit bubbles up. And
Yeah. Then you gotta go to therapy, and it's all.
And I highlighted here that was kind of somewhat pertinent to that question was the fear of being rejected becomes the fear of not being good enough. Eventually we become someone we are not. So we start adopting all of these other beliefs and we start being like, wait a minute, like, is that really like how I want to show up, who I want to be? And then you're around someone that's totally different.
Yep.
That is a different way of being, and then you see how that's possible for other people.
Yeah. That's an interesting concept too, because I've heard somebody else talk about the idea of like having these, you know, different character traits. So like if you're afraid of being rejected, right, you're worried about not being enough, like you do certain actions and make certain decisions in your life that take you in a certain direction, but are you doing them because you truly want to do them yourself, or are you doing them because you're afraid of the consequences? So it's not so much a matter of like, do you have that trait? How much of it do you have?
Yeah.
I think that's such an interesting concept to apply to like things across all your decision making.
Yeah, like which person is making the decision? You know?
Yeah, the fear one or
And it's really hard to figure it out. It really is hard to figure it out.
No doubt.
Anything else you got over there?
Yeah, under the domestication, I'm just trying to think. I had this highlight or underline. That is why we need a great deal of courage to challenge our own beliefs, because even if we know we didn't choose all of our beliefs, it is true that we agreed to all of them. So like we all know probably deep down subconsciously that that's not our truest self, but we've like adopted it and we're subscribing to it and we're continually going down that path until we just decide, nope, that's enough. Like either something's painful enough to cause change or something is good enough that you see on the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
It's like the pain pleasure changing things.
Yeah, I feel like everyone has like a deep sense of knowing whether what they just did is right or wrong. You know, like I feel like everyone can kind of feel whether or not that's true, but it's like understand, like being able to feel that feeling and like learn from it. You know, like there are times like where maybe I do something and like the time I'm like I thought it was a good idea, but then right afterwards I'm like, I maybe shouldn't have done that. You know, and you just and a lot of people just don't listen to that voice, and that's where it kind of takes them down that path of maybe a life they don't want to live. You know, but I feel like everyone kind of knows roughly what they're supposed to do. And if they don't act in accordance with it, that's when you see like a little cognitive dissonance there.
What about when you know that you made the wrong choice and you still know you should do something about it, and you're still not doing it?
Yeah, that's a hard
tough
one. That's especially nowadays. 'Cause it's so easy just to vegetate and just like stay on social media and stuff like that. It takes a lot, like you said, courage. I feel like to be able to right your wrong and like try better. And like every day is a new day. You don't have to live in that constant like rut. Like I've been plenty of ruts this year, and it's like in that rut I'm like, well, tomorrow I can be a different person, and like I don't have to keep acting this way. It's really fucking hard, but like you have to be able to do that, and once you do it you feel good because you did the right thing. You know, I feel like it just takes a lot more work to get out of doing the wrong thing than to do the right thing. I feel like
This just goes kind of to what like I highlighted here. True justice is paying only once for each mistake. True injustice is paying more than once for each mistake. So if you're continually doing these mistakes, recognizing that we are new every day. Like we can choose to be someone different slightly every day and get on a different path. And I believe that, you know, we're either moving upward or we're moving downward, or, you know, if you're staying the same, then they're kind of moving downward. There's always something that you're dealing with that you have a choice of how you're going to, you know, show up to it. And forgiveness, you know, from something else or from yourself is super important, I think, because then you're like, hey, I'm screwing up, and then we put ourselves in this purgatory because we're not good enough, we're not worthy, we're not making the right choice.
With yourself.
You make that agreement to yourself, like you're not worthy of being someone better. And instead of like saying, you know what, I screwed up, I'm gonna own it. And that goes into the first agreement, but like, how do I be honest with myself? Because that's the foundation of everything, is that integrity, your own word to yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you break it outside, to yourself,
And you don't need, and no one else knows that you broke it besides yourself. So it's like and you live with yourself 24 hours a day. So it's definitely someone you got to be honest with.
The next question I had is, he claims the human mind is dreaming even when awake. What do you think about that? And this would always kind of...
Dude, I'm daydreaming all the time. It's hard for me to focus, dude. Like, if I'm listening to music, I'm daydreaming. When I'm in class, I'm daydreaming. But I feel like maybe dreaming is in like a cognitive sense. Probably like you're dreaming about who you want to be and how you want to act in that particular moment. I know like if I'm in a rut, like we were speaking, like my daydreaming is not a good one. But when I'm at training, when I'm feeling good that day, like when the sun's out, it's like good dreaming. Like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. I also feel like a lot of people dream so much they don't actually exist in the present moment. Yes. So like they're always thinking about things. Like that's something that I've been struggling with. Like I listen to so much music that I kind of just daydream all the time. And I've been trying to just like to sit with myself and like sit outside and just have like no music, no nothing playing. And it's hard, man, because it's like when you're in that constant dream state, it can be good for you in a sense that like you can strive for good things. It can be bad for you in a sense that it can bring you down. But also I feel like we need to start living in the present moment. By we, I just mean myself, but I feel like everyone's dreaming in a sense. It's kind of like the Matrix. You're in the Matrix, you're dreaming about things, and then you wake up and like reality's awful, and you got to be able to deal with that. I feel like most of my personal problems come from me just not being able to sit still and like just literally just not do anything, because I would just move all the time. So that's kind of my interpretation of it.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. I think that the distinction between dreaming and then action, like so you can be like thoughtlessly action oriented, and just like filling your time with scrolling and doing all the other stuff that may or may not be beneficial, but then like dreaming towards a goal or towards a way of being that you're an athlete, so you're going to continually act in a way that would be in accordance with that. And so like even if you're not thinking about it, and that's kind of the beauty of habits, right? Habits are like thoughtless ways of being. You've created like a rhythm and a pattern, so you just show up here. You know that if I just keep doing my pattern of showing up here, I'm going to continually get better at jiu-jitsu. So like that's part of the dream, I think, too, is like it's heavy to think about this all the time. And so like you have to have some outlet to like recognize that there's successful ways and healthy ways of dealing with that dream and that fog and creating patterns, creating habits.
Yep.
Yeah, my interpretation of that kind of whole concept of the dreaming is there's also the negative side of it. Like, so in Stoicism, when they're talking about when you imagine all this terrible stuff that happens that never actually happens, there's like that negative dark side of this dreaming. Because you just have your thoughts throughout the day, and like you said, you can, be dreaming of a goal but not actually moving towards it. I think you also have that side of you that just pictures all the terrible things that go wrong, but it's like not reality. So again, it's not in line with the agreement. Like it's not.
It's not the truth.
I think there's also a balance to that, because I know they have premeditatio maiorum, which is what my dad always tells me anytime I'm about to make a big decision, which is like preemptively think about the worst thing that could happen, but not so much so that you end up dwelling on it and thinking it's going to happen, but just knowing that that's like a possibility. And so there definitely is a balance with that, but I feel like it's like when being disciplined of when does the dream stop and when does your like logic start, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good healthy exercise of like particularly pros and cons. If you're ever going to do something, like you can actually logically think about like the cons of something, the worst case scenario. Like, all right, I'm homeless, I lose all my kids, I have no job, and I'm literally like the very worst case scenario. Okay, like, all right, like how would I deal with that? I would still be breathing if I had the ability to breathe, and I would walk around and talk to people and see what I would do. Like that's the very worst case scenario. And so like you can look at that as being like, well, I guess I can deal with that.
Yeah,
like,
knowing you'll be okay.
Yeah,
in any given situation.
and like there's that versus like dwelling, like thinking all these really dark thoughts and feelings, and like, oh my gosh, what if this happens? What if this happens? And all this worry. That's really not really useful. Yeah, like it's like using the fear in a negative way or using it in a positive way of changing it, turning it away. Like that's not that bad. I can deal with it.
Yeah, definitely a balance there.
And then that kind of image of perfection in causes of suffering, he talks about that. What is your image of perfection? So, in terms of the dream of the planet, and he also talks about perfection in terms of the first agreement, impeccability, being perfect with your word, like having it be, full of integrity. I like how he broke down the word too.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, the image of perfection and causes of how that causes suffering?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have my personal image of perfection. I feel like your image of perfection is just whatever life that you look up to and want to model. So I know some people they'll look up to someone like Jeff Bezos because he's an entrepreneur, he has a lot of money. I know other people would probably look up to Marcus Aurelius because he was really stoic in his success and he didn't really need any of it. I definitely have my idea of perfection just from athletes and different leaders throughout history, But also I feel like it's hard to always live in a perfect way. And like we were saying, that kind of goes back to a negative thing. If you don't live in accordance, if you have such an idea of what perfection is and you don't live in exact accordance with it, it can start to bring you down a bad path, Some of my beliefs are definitely negative, and I've definitely struggled with having too high of a standard for myself. In that regard, if I miss a training session, I'm just wiped out for the entire hour and 30 or 2 hours I would have been training. I'm just wiped out. I'm like, dude, I should have gone there. That's not how I want to be. But it's maybe I did need a rest day that day. And what was the second part of the question? So your ideal of perfection.
So, and what is your image of perfection? So, what are some of the causes of suffering? If you just kind of mentioned that,
not living in accordance with it,
And then the suffering of if you don't live to this ideal that may or may not be realistic, and you're stepping into that, you're going to make yourself suffer.
Yeah,
you're going to beat yourself up.
I feel like everyone should have an ideal, and I talk about that a lot in my kids' class. We're not acting this way just to act, we're acting in a way to strive towards an ideal. Not that you're one day you may be that ideal, and the next day you may not. But it's every day you're giving 100% of your usable effort to get to that ideal. And one day it may be you're 50% of the way there, but that's all you could really muster up that day. And the other day you may be perfect, and the next day you may not be. So it's just being able to kind of gauge yourself and strive towards it, I feel is really important, but also not be so attached to it that if you don't get there, it ruins your mentality. So that's kind of my perception of it.
Yeah, I'll tag onto that and just work backwards in that question, that maybe recalibrating our idea of perfection to something that's realistic for being a human.
Yeah.
Because if I'm picturing what perfection of a human is, it's kind of accepting everything that is being human, and not, we go way off board we have wild expectations now. We get to look into the lives of people they're human, but their lives are very much unlike ours, just as common people, right?
Yeah.
So I think our expectations have been way elevated and kind of out of control.
Oh yeah.
So maybe. Yeah.
Well, also everyone just posts the highlights, and even when someone does post the negative aspect, it doesn't really ring with me, someone could be I was in a rut today, didn't really get what I was doing done, and I'm well, that may be one day out of 100 because this person's living the life that I want to live instead of me thinking that I'm living the life that I want to live. And definitely feeling a range of emotions is very important. Kind of we were talking about with your daughter, it's really important to have emotions and being able to feel them. And also, maybe the idea of perfection could also be that in those negative moments and how you're supposed to act. If I'm feeling really sad, do I want to go and buy a drink or buy a cigarette, or do I want to sit with it and journal about it and feel it, talk to my friends about it and stuff like that? So there could be an ideal of perfection even in the negative sense.
Yeah, it's all based on our values. We all individually create what we value, right? And so, for me, ideal is finding peace in the storm, even and that's what I idealize as far as people that have really rough things happen to them and they're still able to, and that goes back to stoicism.
What's peace look like for you?
Accepting what is, and then creating something on top of that. And that's something that I've worked with the coach about. It's not denying reality, not ignoring it, not just lying about what's actually happening, but facing it, accepting what it is, and then creating something on top of it. So you always have, it's like Viktor Frankl, it's you have the ability to decide how you want to be at any given moment. And that's peace right there in terms of, but it's also ultimate responsibility, which is a lot of work too, right? It's never ending. yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. Is the suffering is comparison. Comparison's a thief of all joy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you can do that good and bad. You know, you can always compare yourself to someone that you think you're better off than, and make yourself feel artificially better. Mm-hmm. And that's not good either. You know, versus someone that you think you're not doing as well with.
Yeah.
The next question I had was about the first agreement. So, why is the first agreement so powerful? Be impeccable with your word. How have you experienced the power of your word in yourself or in others that you experience?
I feel like it's like you were saying, like the word is the first, like in the religious sense, the word's the very first thing that existed. And that's true, I feel like, just for any human being. Like the moment you gain consciousness is really the moment you're able to speak and think, you know. And I feel like what you say should be 100% in line with what you think. But you got to make sure that what you think is on point too, because if what you think's not on point, then your word's not going to be on point. And I've definitely experienced, like, whenever there is a distance between what I think and what I say, like maybe I'm not courageous enough in that moment to really speak my mind and speak my truth, you definitely feel awful afterwards. Like, I'm like, oh, I should have worded it like this. I got real nervous, then this happened, and it usually never ends up working out when you do something like that. Versus if you just tell the truth right at that moment, it may be like a bad blowback, but instead of like dealing with it over and over and over and over again. And I feel like the word's really all you really have. My arms and legs could be taken away from me, my sight could be taken away from me, but then all I have left is my word that's in my head. And so I feel like it's the most important thing to like just live in accordance with it and figure out what accordance with it is, because a lot of people don't even know what their values are, what their morals are, and you can't really say what your morals are until you can think about them and know what they are. So it takes like a lot of rumination and meditation, I feel like, to understand your word, and then a lot of courage to be able to speak it as well. That's kind of my answer to that question.
That. Yeah, I'll add to that. Just the word is, like you said, your thoughts. Mm-hmm. You can't have thoughts without words, without language. Yeah. Language is what differentiates our thoughts. So these thoughts come through our head, and we're able to accept them or not accept them. And that's part of the work I've done too, is acknowledging that not all of our thoughts are really empowering or not. You know, so which ones do I want to attach myself to? Mm-hmm. So if I'm observing my thoughts, then who is observing? That's who we all are. We're above our thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so when you're not in accordance with your word, particularly if it's just that you know yourself, it's really harmful. I mean, it's really, really harmful for your own self-will, your own showing up powerfully, because when you speak, you're creating. Every word you use, every thought you express outwardly creates something. And if you're willy-nilly about it, and the world around you doesn't recognize it's a reflection of how you believe your own word to be. Mm-hmm. And if you don't value it, if you just say it out there, you reduce the impact of it.
Yeah, I feel like it's also readily apparent to other people when someone, like, everyone kind of has an idea of when someone's like acting in accord with how they actually are, and like what they say is true and what they say is what they think. Like someone like Joe or Dan, it's like, you know, deep in your heart that like you can't really make it out, but whatever they say, they mean, you know. And there's other people, it could be even as small as like, you know, one of my training partners saying, hey, I'll be there tonight, and they're not there. You know, that small little thing could be like you weren't in accordance with your word. At least, you know, if you're not gonna be there, you can tell someone, you know. And I feel like you can, like, everyone has the ability to read someone in that way. Like, even like off of like a first interaction or a second interaction, you can kind of tell if someone's gonna be true to their word or if they're all just talk, you know. And so I feel like even from that sense, it's like from a societal perspective, from a culture perspective, you need to live in accordance with your words. That way you can live with other people. Because if you're not in accordance with your words, it's gonna be hard for others people to get along with you in that sense.
Yes, and that, to me, there's nobody's perfect either. There's like holding that belief, but then recognizing that no one's perfect.
Yep.
And so like Dan or Joe or anyone else that we say is a perfect, you know, really good example, they're human.
Yeah.
And they make mistakes.
Yeah.
But they're also the people that I look up to and that I idealize and that I want to emulate their behavior are people that clean up the mess. Mm-hmm. And like you made a mistake, you said you were going to do something, or you weren't your word at a given moment.
Yeah.
Guess what? You cleaned it up, and you're now on a different path.
Yep.
Instead of just denying it and
being like, oh man, this came up, I didn't think about it yet. Mm-hmm.
There's also like a instant admiration when people like kind of recognize that, because you recognize it in other people, right? Because I think you were speaking in a different manner, but even like in a very physical manner, somebody like actually like picking up trash that they don't have to pick up. Like you admire that person.
Yeah.
Like you just know that there's like a pure trait about that willingness to just, you know, do their part.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, super powerful.
Yeah, from a teaching perspective, like if I'm with an instructor who's like, okay, it looks like we're not all understanding this, like, let's try that again, versus someone like, hey guys, I don't think I explained this the right way, so let me try to explain it in like better terms where you can understand. Like someone like, even from a small point, like I make it a big emphasis of whenever like someone in my kids' class is like, hey, what if this happens? I'm like, I really appreciate you asking that question. Like maybe I forgot that part, and I really like that shows that you were listening to me, you know. Or like if I mess something up, like maybe no one's getting technique, I'll bring everyone in. I'll be like, it was my mistake, guys. I didn't word that the right way, so let me try to give you a few more tips to try to get it to you guys, and then like versus like being angry at everyone, like why aren't you doing it the way that I said? Like you should be able to do this, but honestly, you can't have anyone do something they don't know how to do without wording it the right way. You know, like I've definitely had instructors where they'll teach a knee slice and they're like, step in, underhook, pass the guard. Whereas, you know, someone like Joe, he gives as much detail as possible because that's true to his word, you know. And being true to your word goes to literally every aspect, you know. But from a teaching perspective, that's kind of how I see it. You got to be true to your word, especially with kids. Like that's the those are the people you have to really be true with your word. 'Cause even like one small slip up, like we were talking about with the agreements, one small slip up could be like the downfall for a kid. Like if like a kid's at a tournament, he loses and he's like all distraught about it, and I'm like, you really could have won that match if you just tried harder. Then they may never want to compete again because like, well, I just don't try hard enough. So it's like, and then that could just change their whole life.
Yeah.
And you don't really realize that as an adult, but you have to, you know, especially as a dad, as a teacher, even just as a regular person, you know, you got to know that.
Yeah. It's so funny that just brings up that thought. That saying, sticks and stones, right? Maybe, but words will never hurt me. It's like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like if you've ever gone back to something that someone really, like, venomously said something to you with poison, it's like, wow, that leaves a lasting imprint, right? It does. And so it takes work to get beyond that and accept the fact that really what it is that's their deal. Like, and that's kind of goes into the other chapters as we'll read on. Like, don't take things personally. It's like that's their own story. That's their own journey. They're projecting on you what it is that they're dealing with. So impeccability with your word is really for ourselves.
So what's y'all's opinion of the saying that actions speak louder than words? I mean, I know we're talking a lot about how important the word is, but what's your opinion on like actions speak louder than words in that regard?
I think it's easy to say things. A lot of times, for most people in our society, we accept that people will say things and then not back it up. So it's minimize the power of the word. So when the other beautiful opposite side of that is you don't have to speak either. You just do things, and you are a person of action, and people see that, and you don't even need to say anything. And that goes with public speaking too. It's like, you know, 80% of your information is nonverbal, you know? So you're communicating through language, impeccability with your word without even saying things, you know?
Yeah, I mean, your word might be just the way that you come into the world.
Yep.
Like, it might not even be something like you're saying. I think that's what you may be alluding to is might not even be something you're speaking.
Or you give, you know, I've caught myself give my kids a look, right? And it's like, whoa, that's a really mean, like, because I'm a big guy, you know, like they're little people. And like, so, you know, you're really upset with them and you give them a really dirty look and it's like, shit, like it's not good, you know, but then it's also, I'm doing the best I can too. So it's like that borderline of forgiveness too. Like I can dwell on that all day or a month or a year or whatever, or I can show an example of how I'm not perfect and I don't expect them to be, so I can apologize.
Or like later that day you take them out for ice cream or something because you felt bad about it. And you don't even have to say sorry, but like it's just like you having that time with your kid.
Yeah.
And like they'll probably remember that. Like I definitely remember times like when my mom or dad got mad at me and like I really dwelled on it, and then like they were like, hey, do you want to get anything from McDonald's? Like I'll go and drive right now to go get it. And it's like, I think as a kid you can even kind of understand that like, oh, I think they're apologizing for what they've done. Now obviously there's a flip side to that. Like if someone's physically abusing you or mentally abusing you, don't accept like, oh hey, yeah, I bought you this because I said so many awful things about you. But
that's bribery.
Yeah, that's bribery.
Not love.
That's manipulation right there.
Yeah, I have a buddy who actually is very good about this with his kid. Whenever he kind of just gets short with him or something, he always takes the time to like first apologize and then explain. Like, he just explained where he's coming from.
Yeah.
And to, like, actually make that connection with his kid, you know, probably when he was younger, he didn't really understand as much. But now as Max is getting older, I think, you know, that I just admire that about my friend, that he's very open with his son about why things are happening the way they're happening.
Communicating with them like an adult.
Yeah, communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I highlighted in here, one edge is the misuse of the word, which creates a living hell. The other edge is the impeccability of your word, which will only create beauty, love, and heaven on earth. I like that idea.
Yeah.
What is important is to see which kind of seeds our mind is fertile for, and to prepare it to receive the seeds of love. So as you're speaking that beauty into the world, you know, you're not fertile, and they kind of go into the example of Hitler. Like, you know, Germany was fertile for like resentment, anger, and blame, and so you had this person go out there and feed to that, where versus being fertile, working on love, compassion, you know, all these other different types of energies, and you're not fertile for that hate. Kind of the last question I had was, when was the last time you said something, says you would do something you didn't? It was kind of breaking the impeccability word, and that could be big or small, but I'm just trying to think of even myself. You know, there's we remember the big things, right? Like with me, with cheating on my wife for a consistent long time. You know, there was not integrity in my word, right? So that was it was really hard to deal with that, and to be living in that living hell, because you're recognizing that you are just a scumbag. It's not being honest. So when you come clean, it was like the hugest weight. You know, that's why people like to get caught too. I didn't get caught, but I came clean. But it's like, that's why people want to get caught, to get out of that pain, right? And so
takes the onus off of them.
Yeah, because they're creating a living hell for themselves, because they're not in integrity with who they want to be.
Yeah, I feel like I can remember, not like an experience, but like a feeling. Like I feel like the greatest like time that like there was a dissonance is usually just with myself and like in my own being. You know, like if I'm in a rut, if I'm like if I'm doing a lot of drugs, like I'm smoking weed all the time, if I'm like smoking all the time, like smoking cigarettes all the time, like I definitely have a propensity towards that. And like whenever I do that, like I just create a living hell for myself, because it's like I'm sleeping all day, I'm eating food all day, I'm like not going to training. If I am at training, I'm not really there, because mentally I'm really negative on myself and I can't focus at all. And it's like, for me, it's not really any action I've done to anyone else. It's really always actions I've done with myself. You know, I make a joke with people and like with my girlfriend. It's like, they're always like, why do you never get angry? I'm like, the only person I could probably ever get angry with in my entire life is myself. You know, because I can understand where other people are coming from. If someone like literally punches me in the face, I could probably not be angry with them within like an hour. Because it's like, oh, I understand why you did that. And if I had everything going on in your head that you had in your head, and like all the negative thoughts you had, I would have done the same thing. And it's like, I can easily forgive other people, but when it comes to myself, God, I live with myself all the time. That's the person that I usually end up doing the wrong things with, if that makes sense. So it wouldn't really be a certain event, but it would definitely be like how I treat myself, like in the agreements that I have. Like I was saying, like my sister used to say a bunch of negative things about me, and like when I get in those headspaces, like I'm like, oh yeah, she was right, you know, all those negative things she was saying, I definitely am living up to it right now. And that's definitely, like you're saying, it's a living hell, you know. It's like, and that's one that's really hard to get out of, I feel like. And so it's never really a negative reaction towards anyone else. It's usually one towards myself, if I had to choose something.
How do you get yourself out of it? How have you?
It's really hard. Yeah. It is really hard, because it's like some days it's like I'll feel good, and then like that day maybe something bad happens and it sends me right back down the rabbit hole. Usually for me it's just doing the damn thing, like just regardless of how I feel, I just have to do the same thing over and over. Because like if I'm like, I don't feel good today, I'm not gonna go to training. Well, then the next day I'm like, well, I didn't feel good yesterday, I didn't go to training. I can just skip this one too. I train all the time. You know, so long as I can just continue doing the same thing despite like how I'm feeling, and like moderate the negative behavior towards myself, I typically can get out of it within like a few days. Yeah. But it's like that slow struggle of like getting out of it and not falling back into it, because it's like it's a really, really slow process. So me, it's just like people ask how I'm motivated to go train. It's like, well, I'm motivated because I know if I don't go, it's gonna get real bad for me, because I'm not living up to that ideal. Yeah, definitely getting out of it's really tough, but I think it's just doing the same things I would do if I was happy, because then I'm just like, as long as I'm doing the same things, I'll be fine. Like I remember Jocko, he said, you don't have to be happy, you have to be disciplined. So it's like even in those awful times, you just got to keep doing the same thing. Even if it's like even if it's I'm just going to go to training and watch, at least I'm there, or it's like I'm just going to sit outside for a minute today versus I didn't go outside at all yesterday. So it's like something like that,
Yeah.
And usually I'll journal a lot about it and like try to find what is causing it, which takes a long time sometimes. And then I'll try to like create a solution in my head about how I can fix that and different things like that. So definitely a lot of self-introspection and just doing the same thing like every single day and regardless of how I feel.
One way I've found to get like out of the self-hatred and that loop, that negative loop, is to try to find one way, simplest way to do something for someone else.
Yep.
And like that could be like as simple as buying someone coffee behind you, or like literally just one minor shift of like thinking about someone else to do something. And you do that with teaching the kids.
Yeah, every time I'm in a rut, I know if I can make it to the kids class, I'm fine.
Exactly, because you're doing something of service to someone else, and so like you're out of your own like thoughts about yourself, and actually like for one, and that's the thing, is like you just get out of your own way and you just think of someone else. It helps.
Yeah, that's
At
funny.
least it helped for me.
That's funny you say that. Usually on the training sessions where I feel like I'm in a rut, I always end up coaching someone on the sideline instead of like actually doing any work myself. For some reason, I always just in my mind just wants to like talk to someone instead of just be in my own head. You know, so that like you're saying, doing something for someone else definitely is a way to get out of it. Because if you could do something for someone else, it's a lot easier to do something for yourself. And vice versa.
This sums up what you just said. You can measure the impeccability of your word by your level of self-love.
Yeah.
And I really like what you said too. It's like, peace to you is finding the humanity in all of us. We're all living in a human experience. So like, try to embrace that, the good and bad, and like, not beat yourself up for the bad too, right?
Sure, because it's going to be there, right?
Yeah, it's going to be there. And the interesting thing too is that I've discovered just talking to lots of people and kind of working through this stuff with other folks, is like, we think we're really unique and we have our own stories, and really most people have very similar issues, and it goes back to like self-love and accepting of ourselves, and not being rejected, not being a part of something bigger than ourselves, being in a community of some sort. And yeah, it's super interesting that self-love is but you get self-love by loving other people.
Yep.
It's like the paradox too.
Yeah. Life is just one big paradox, I feel like, just one huge paradox.
Well, what else you guys got?
I wrote down this one because I'm really bad about it. So I was talking about, like, he talks about dark spells you cast on yourself and you cast on the people. And I wrote, in knowing this, do not cast black magic or opinions on others. Try your best not to gossip. Misery likes company. See the world through your own eyes, and perception is not the perception of others. I love gossip so much. I'm a fiend for gossip. But usually, like, I only like gossip if it's like one-on-one, like me with someone else and no one there, because like it's just like you're talking about people. It's like crazy. It's like little stories you can like have in your head. I don't typically find myself gossiping when there's a lot of people around, because then I feel like that generates so much negativity, and then I get in the headspace of like, well, what are they gonna say about me when I leave the building? But if like someone's like, if I come home and like Parker's like, dude, you'll never guess what happened today, like obviously I'm gonna listen to it. But usually I try to like have a balance where like I maybe play devil's advocate at a point, or like where I just don't say as much of my opinion. But I definitely, if I've had a boring day, some gossip will definitely get me going about anything. I try just to like listen to it, but not like feed into any negative like thought. Like if they're like, oh, can you, like, I was at training today and this person did this, like, can you believe that? I'd be like, dude, that's crazy. Like, how'd that make you feel? Like, stuff like that. Versus, like, man, that guy, I can't believe he did that. He's an awful person. Can you, like, what does that say about him, Because then I'm, like, negatively speaking about people. I usually just try to listen to it and to see, like, what information I can gather about people. But I definitely do get in a headspace of, like, gossiping too much. And I also talk a lot. Like, my girlfriend sometimes, she's like, will you ever let me speak? And I'm like, well, I don't get to talk that much. And I just like talking a lot. So that's definitely something that I run into.
I think the toxic nature of the gossip thing is that there's a bonding element.
Yeah.
Yep.
And people come together, and if you're not contributing, like you might, or at least your perception might be that people are thinking like, oh, he's not one of us.
Yeah.
So,
And it takes a bunch of courage to do that. Like I'm the firehouse, it was
Bad for it.
full of gossip. And it was, like you said, a common enemy. Like it would be the fire chief, or it would be city council, or it would be, someone that we could aim our gossip and our anger towards.
Yeah.
And so we'd all bond on that. And as I was going through my journey, I was stepping away from that, or trying to, working on that. And it was something and it was really interesting because you start recognizing, like, if these people, and myself included, if I'm gossiping a lot, like, I can gossip about anybody.
Yep.
But as I'm gossiping less, I'm less likely to gossip about other people.
Yep.
So people, like, it's like really interesting because you're like, if they're saying about that other people, you start running that down. They're talking about me somehow too. And so, like, I just want to be less engaged in that. And it was a really interesting exercise because, you're with people 48 hours a day, like 48 hours at a time or more. And it's like, that's kind of how you commiserate. Like you're in a struggle, and it's like military, here, all the public, servants.
One thing that I've found is like, if someone is gossiping about someone and I don't agree with it, sometimes like without an intention of not gossiping, I'll be like, really, with that guy? I'm like, I've never had a problem with him. And then like literally the gossip will just stop right there. Like the other person's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna stop talking about it. And I found myself doing that with like other people. Like be talking to Joe, I'll be like gossiping, and he'll just be like, yeah, really, that guy? I don't really see a problem. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just stop talking about it then. It kind of puts the other person in check too. And like I know when I'm gossiping and someone says something like that, like it really makes me think about like what I just said. It makes you like reflect on like what kind of energy you just put into the world.
Yeah.
So it's like I try my best not to gossip about people unless like someone did something totally egregious. Like if someone like wrecked, like did a hit and run, I'm like, I don't know why anyone would ever do that. Like what kind of person would do that, But if it's something small, like, can you believe this person like did this in training today? It's like that doesn't really matter,
Well, you appreciate people's courage.
Yep.
So if someone were to, like, because there's times when people stand up for you, or you hear that, oh, Evan or Justin, no way.
Yeah.
That's totally, you're out of line. Like, he's a good dude. Like,
Yep.
So if someone goes bad for you, it's like, whoa, that means a lot. Like, because particularly when you're not there to defend yourself, or even, again, this goes back to not taking things personally too. Trying to control what other people think is a really, really problematic situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I actually highlighted gossiping has become the main form of communication in human society. It has become the way we feel close to each other because it makes us feel better to see someone else feel as badly as we do. When you're full of self-love and you're full of light and you're full of like the positive energy, you're not really, there's no space for it.
Yeah. You're not thinking about anyone else in that regard, It's not like, I feel like a lot of people let other people live in their head rent free,
Oh, yeah.
And so like, if you're just focused on your own journey and your own life, you really don't have, like you're saying, space in your head to have an opinion about someone that doesn't really matter, but doesn't, like, their actions don't change anything in the grand scheme of things.
I think about this too when they say the haters, right? The haters don't ever hate down.
Yeah.
Like, you don't ever hate on people that are like in your own thought process doing not as well as you are.
Yeah.
And it's like, because that's part of human nature. We always want to compare ourselves to someone better than, or doing something that we aspire to, and we want to bring them down, or we want to bring ourselves up. And that's a way to do it. But yeah, that was a really good first couple chapters. The next chapter, chapter 2.
Said don't take it personally.
That's right.
A lot of good questions.
Yeah.
I like those
So
questions.
thanks for.
Don't take things personally, guys. It's a good one. This is the next little book. So, yeah, that's about it for today. Anything else, guys?
No, that was a good one. I like the questions we did, and I definitely want to start doing that more often. And I'll try to ask more questions too. So
Cool. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Tristan.
Yes,
See you guys.
sir. See ya.